she had the kind of credibility that goes to telling the truth.
And one thing that I heard, and this is something, you know, I want you to talk a little bit about, your style of law and how you prosecuted that versus his defense.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what I've heard is it's almost like it was small town against big town. It was the local guy, local hero out there and come in. He wore cowboy boots, I believe.
Not in the trial.
Not in the trial.
No, I've been wearing them forever because I got flat feet, not because, and they last a lot longer. But they were trying. The media was trying to pick up on what I thought was silly stuff, extraneous things, and I was not interested in making some kind of a what's his name, the Jerry, the guy from out west with the fringed coat. I'll think of it in a minute.
Yeah,
I wasn't looking at doing that. I just wanted to be the guy doing the work. So I wore my wingtips for 50 days. Didn't give them what they wanted, and believe me, they looked. But the style of prosecution that I learned as a student was essentially in violent crime cases, mostly murders, and you've got the burden of proof, and people think they're tough, but they're not. They become reluctant in a hurry, particularly if some guy's life is on the line. And you can see them fold up like a cheap card table when it comes time to talk about whether the guy's going to live or not. So you have to go hard, hit them a lot of evidence in a hurry, but it's got to be organized, and it can't get tripped up in a bunch of extraneous abstractions or objections, so you have to be prepared. Teach the witnesses to understand what the courtroom's about. Make sure they understand what you're looking for. You don't want a blank stare out of somebody that's nervous anyway because they don't understand where that question came from. You don't want some guy being over on the defense side to be able to interrupt us with a big, long-winded objection. So you make sure that your questions are formed properly, and that way you can put the pedal down and go right through it, which we did. Mr. Fuller was a much white-collar guy. Matter of fact, he represented not Tyson but Don King, which is how he ended up stuck with this case. King was indicted by the feds for tax evasion, I think, some kind of financial crime, and he walked him. And so Vince told me afterward that King would have nothing to do with anybody else. And I got to go see him one time, I was in D.C. for something, and we had a glass of wine one afternoon. He said they insisted, and I knew that if anybody was going to lose it had to be me. And of course, he had Jim Voiles, dear friend of mine, who's a magnificent lawyer. I tell him that we'd have got done in half the time, and he'd have been twice as good, but I'd have won anyway because our evidence was good. And he didn't get to do anything. He never got to speak with the jury in the room, which is a big mistake. Not understanding your venue.
Do you think that home court advantage gave you some kind of a leg up on this?
Yeah, I think it one thing that we had to do, and they didn't do this successfully with William Kennedy Smith. They were not able to do it with Ray Lewis. Is to strip away the celebrity status of a defendant in a violent crime. It's not easy to do that because you can see them. They're sitting there, particularly men. They're looking over there. It's really him, and you know, if he sits there as the guy that they imagine with his heavyweight championship belt around his waist, you're in trouble. He's got to get turned into another copy of the species pretty fast. He was easier to do that with than some would be, because he had pretty much of a bad boy reputation, didn't testify well, got mad. I had him, he was holding on to the garment that he'd torn, and I got under his skin some way, I forget how, and he threw it at the court reporter. I mean, not in her face, but right across her desk, because she was sitting right next to him. And I thought, okay, touchdown, quit. 47 minutes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Once we got him to show his backside, we all the intelligence we could get in preparing for that told us, establish what points you want to make them and sit down, because everybody loves the sound of their own voice, and you keep going, pretty soon you trip over it, he says something and you say something, and then you've got issues with the record. So we went through it, and there was some that thought I did a terrible job on that. They didn't know what they were talking about, and still don't. But the ones that did know, there were a couple of guys that were, Judge John Tranberg, who was retired from the bench at that point, and whom I prosecuted in front of many times, to include death penalty cases, gave me great reviews on that. It's nice to see something good in the middle of all that kind of thing.
Yeah. So talk about the verdict. You know, this is the 22-year verdict anniversary today. You go to the court, and they finally come in and said that the jury's reached a verdict. And you know, what's going through your mind at the time? You think you got it? You think you've got it, or?
That's about three answers. We got done about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Barbara Trathan, my co-counsel, is a wonderful lawyer, dear friend. She and I lived on top of each other for 4 months and never had a crossword. Very close friend of my wife's, my now wife, who at the time we didn't hardly know each other. So we went to Iria's down in college, and that was the gathering place. And the big dining room in the back, I don't know if you're familiar with that restaurant. It's a great place, sweet people.
Yeah.
And we stayed there till, I got a call about, I don't know, not quite 11 p.m. So they were out for 10 hours. So we loaded up, back we went. And this happens once in a while. I don't know what's just blind luck, but a couple times I've come back when a verdict has been in, and I walk in the courtroom and the place is empty except for the defendant. And he and I were the only two men in the room. And we were, I suppose we were 30 feet apart, far enough that I could get away from him without getting my head knocked off. And we made eye contact, and he just kind of nodded a little bit. And I had that sense, he knows. Matter of fact, there's a chapter in Heavy Justice that Randy Roberts wrote with me called They Always Know, and it was about the verdict. And they do. I've had any number of times that either the defendant has said, "You got me," or something like that. And it's never done theatrically, because it's always happened, this has happened, I don't know, half a dozen times, when there's nobody in the room, him and me. And he knew, I could see it, he was resigned to it. And I'd said to the trial team, this goes either way. Behave yourselves. We're not going to look like we've never been there before. So if we lose, pack it up, go out and start drinking. If we win, pack it up, and I don't know what happens after that. I couldn't know, but it was a maelstrom. We got dropped into a vortex that took a week to go away. I don't know how many 100 interviews we did. Yeah. And it started that night.
And so where did they send you off to? Did you go to New York and do some stuff?
Eventually I did. As a matter of fact, we did Barbara Walters' interview for, I think, her show. Desiree and I met there, and she was very nice.
Did you go on Today's Show, any of those kind of shows?
No. Nope. Well, yes, I did. I take that back. I did. Brian Gumbel was still at the Today Show, and they asked me to do the show. I did it remote. Chen Lady took a camera crew up to my office and set up with a satellite truck. And then I got wind that Alan Dershowitz was going to be on too, and I said, nope, I'm out of this. I already won this case. And so get somebody else. Well, we were up on the bird, and it was time. And so Gumbel's gargling golf balls and trying to figure a way out of this mess, and so he agreed that we would not be on at the same time, which turned out not to be true because he was in there. But I did the interview for him and got up in Alan's face a little bit. I have a lot of respect for Dershowitz. He's a hell of a lawyer. A very passionate champion of Israel. He's as Jewish gets, and in all the best sense of the word. But his politics and mine are so very different on some area. We agree a lot on civil libertarian stuff because we both play by the same set of rules. But he had already taken on his macho role as the appellate lawyer, and he was talking to the world about how bad the case was and it was going to get reversed, which he didn't do. It was 2-1 on appeal, though. It was not unanimous. So anyway, they took us out of. We left the courtroom from number 4 on the 2nd floor of the center tower, and they took us to the basement where they had the pool camera set up, the closed circuit. Pat Gifford would not permit broadcast, but she did permit closed circuit. It was very jealous of it being done right, so that nobody could, put the alligator clips on there and start broadcasting it to the world.
Mm-hmm.
But there was, I don't know, hundreds of people in that room, and it was like TV, click flash, and microphones and people yelling at us, and we were just on our last calorie, and spoke that night. In fact, you got a couple of guys that wrote to me about that, my remarks that night. Went home, went back in the morning, and they'd taken the entire entryway into the city county building in the center tower. You got the where the escalators are, and then there's the elevator. Everybody got a square yard. NBC, ABC, CBS, CNN, ESPN. I mean, I don't know, 100 of them from all around the world. And honest to gosh, it was like hopscotch. Barb and I were standing there, and she went here, I went here, and somebody went over here, and somebody went back here, and we went all over this place giving short interviews. I don't know, 20, 50 of them, who knows. And the next night, there used to be CNN had a program called, I can't think of it, where they brought people together from remote locations. And I was on that show. This was even as dopey as I was, I fell asleep just sitting in the car. I was on with Arthur Ashe and Anthony Munoz. They were 2 other guys talking about violence in athletics and in sports. And I was just numb. I could hardly think straight. All I'd done was try to sleep. But it was a thrill to be around either of them, because I don't think Ashe lasted a long time after that. I'd have to look that up to see, but we could sure find out. That was February the 10th, 92, 10th, 12th, 11th, 12th. Yeah. And I was down there to that Channel 20 studio over and again, because everybody was using that because they had a static satellite, as opposed to the truck. Yeah. And off we went. I talked to Malta, I talked to Tokyo, I talked to London. I didn't even know where Malta was. I had to go look it up. I thought it was the place where they got together to divvy up Europe after World War II. No, that's Yalta. So there's an island in the Mediterranean. Yeah. And so that's how life went for 2 weeks, maybe 3.
And you, out of that, I mean, you got a lot of airtime because of that. But out of that, didn't you get a contract to be a legal consultant on the CBS?
O.J. Simpson killed his wife and her friend.
Yeah.
He beheaded both of them. And everybody had to have a prosecutor, and everybody had to have a defense lawyer to talk.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that was the way it was. You had a point, counterpoint on every network. A lot of local stations, the same deal. And remember the famous low-speed chase that happened like on a Tuesday of the week when they found those bodies? And I got a call from a guy named Eubank, sitting in my office just working in the afternoon, summertime. And he wanted to know if I'd be on 48 Hours that night. Opposite Racehorse Haynes, Richard Haynes, the guy from Houston. They wanted to talk about the Fourth Amendment issues of them climbing a wall into Simpson's place. 2 or 3 issues that were pretty naughty issues that meant a lot early on in that case. And I said, well, I'm busy tonight. I mean, they weren't paying me, and I'd done an interview or 2 before. I didn't need to practice. And where are you going to be? And I said, well, I got a kid in 4-H. Actually, I got 2 of them. And there's a clinic up at the Noblesville at the Hamilton County Fairgrounds, riding clinic in preparation for the 4-H fair. And I'm the stable hand. I'm putting on shoes and brushing out horses and being the dad. Well, can we get there? By now I'm thinking, this poor sap is desperate. So I told him where it was, and I said, okay, I'm going to be up there. He said, well, we'll be up there and we'll find you. So they did. Here comes the